Your home is supposed to build wealth. In these 12 Midwest cities, it's doing the opposite. Homes sit vacant for years. Foreclosures spread like contagion through entire neighborhoods. Property values so low, they trap families who can't afford to leave. This isn't about prices dropping 10 or 20%. It's about something far worse. Homes that have become financial prisons in cities slowly being abandoned. The national housing crisis has two faces. In Phoenix and Austin, prices are finally correcting after an unsustainable boom. But in America's industrial heartland, the crisis runs deeper. 78,000 manufacturing jobs vanished in the first 8 months of 2025 alone. Zombie foreclosures, abandoned mid-process, plague entire neighborhoods at rates reaching 9% in some cities. 1 in 4 homes sits empty in Gary, Indiana. Population losses approach 60% in former boomtowns. Here are the 12 Midwest cities where the housing market isn't just crashing, it's collapsing. Rockford, Illinois. On paper, Rockford looks like a success story. Homes sell in just 5 days. The median price sits at $208,000. Zillow ranked it the hottest housing market in America for 2025. But scratch beneath that surface and a darker picture emerges. Rockford moves fast because it's cheap, not because it's thriving. The northern Illinois city represents what happens when affordability becomes a warning sign rather than an advantage. Home prices have barely recovered from the Great Recession, and what growth exists reflects desperation more than demand. Buyers snap up properties quickly because there's nowhere cheaper to go in the Chicago metro area, and because they're racing against the clock before conditions worsen. The city sits in a state bleeding residents at an alarming rate. 93% of Illinois counties shrank between 2010 and 2018, and Rockford found itself caught in that undertow. The manufacturing base that once sustained the region continues its decades-long decline. Caterpillar, once a pillar of Illinois industry, moved its headquarters to Texas in 2022, a symbolic blow to the state's industrial identity. Property values tell the real story. While homes sell quickly, they sell for amounts that barely cover what owners paid years ago. Adjusted for inflation, many homeowners are underwater without even realizing it. The velocity of sales masks the fact that these transactions often represent exits, not investments. People aren't buying to build wealth, they're buying because they're out of options. Illinois' broader fiscal crisis looms over every transaction. The state carries unfunded pension liabilities exceeding $130 billion. Property taxes, already among the nation's highest, continue climbing to cover shortfalls. Homeownership in Rockford means not just a mortgage, but a perpetual tax burden that grows faster than incomes. When your property tax bill increases by 5 or 6% annually, while your home appreciates by 2%, you're losing ground. The speed of Rockford's market reflects something economists call churn, high turnover driven by instability rather than prosperity. Homes change hands quickly because owners leave as soon as they can, not because the city attracts new investment. That 5-day sales pace? It's the sound of people escaping, not arriving. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee presents a paradox: tight inventory and rising prices, yet an affordability crisis that's pushing working families to the breaking point. The median home price climbed 7.1% in 2025, reaching well above $200,000. Inventory dropped 27% compared to pre-pandemic levels. By conventional metrics, this looks like a healthy market. It's not. The city's housing shortage doesn't reflect surging demand. It reflects a complete failure to build. New construction has stalled as developers refuse to speculate on homes in a market where future demand remains uncertain. The few new subdivisions moving forward target upper-income buyers, leaving working-class families competing for a shrinking pool of older homes in declining neighborhoods. Milwaukee's segregation, among the nation's most severe, compounds the crisis. African American home ownership rates lag dramatically behind white rates, and the homes Black families do manage to purchase appreciate far more slowly than properties in predominantly white neighborhoods. A home purchased on Milwaukee's north side might take 15 years to gain 10% in value, while a comparable property in Wauwatosa appreciates 30% in the same period. This isn't just an equity issue, it's a wealth-building failure that perpetuates poverty across generations. Property taxes and insurance costs eat into whatever gains homeowners might achieve. The city and county both face budget pressures that translate into steadily rising tax bills. Insurance premiums have jumped as companies factor in climate risks. Milwaukee experienced severe flooding in 2024 that damaged thousands of properties. When insurance doubles over 5 years while your home value increases by single digits, you're losing wealth, not building it. The job market provides little relief. Milwaukee's economy, once anchored by manufacturing, now relies heavily on healthcare and services, sectors that pay less and offer fewer paths to middle-class stability. Median household income growth has lagged inflation for years, meaning the typical family has less purchasing power today than a decade ago. They're house poor in a market that's supposedly tight. Most concerning is Milwaukee's position in a Rust Belt corridor that continues to shed population. Wisconsin as a whole is barely growing, and Milwaukee County actually lost residents in recent years. Tight inventory today doesn't guarantee strong demand tomorrow. When the next recession hits, Milwaukee's hot market could freeze overnight, leaving homeowners who stretch to buy trapped with properties they can neither afford nor sell. The 7% price growth masks the reality. Milwaukee's housing market is expensive without being valuable. Homes cost more, but they don't deliver the wealth-building returns that homeownership promises. That's not a healthy market. It's a trap dressed up as success. Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw's housing crisis isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and suffocating, the slow strangulation of a city where homes sit empty by the thousands. Property values stagnate for decades, and entire neighborhoods fade into abandonment. The rental vacancy rate stands at 11%, nearly double the healthy threshold. That's not a tight market, it's a hollowing out. The city's industrial collapse created this housing death spiral. General Motors, once Saginaw's economic anchor, shuttered most of its operations decades ago. The ripple effects continue today. Lost jobs lead to foreclosures. Foreclosures lead to blight. Blight drives remaining residents away, and that exodus further undermines property values. It's a feedback loop with no bottom in sight. Property values in Saginaw aren't just low, they're functionally meaningless. Homes sell for $20,000 or $30,000, amounts that barely cover demolition costs. At these price points, traditional home ownership economics break down completely. A home isn't an investment, it's a liability with a roof. You can't build wealth when your property appreciates by $500 a year, while property taxes, insurance, and maintenance consume $3,000 or $4,000 annually. Zombie foreclosures plague Saginaw's neighborhoods at alarming rates. These are homes abandoned mid-foreclosure process. The owner walked away, but the bank hasn't yet taken possession. They sit vacant for months or years, deteriorating and attracting crime. Adjacent property values collapse. Entire blocks become ghost streets where only 1 or 2 occupied homes remain, surrounded by structures sliding into ruin. The rental market offers no escape. An 11% vacancy rate means landlords compete desperately for tenants, driving rents down to levels where maintaining properties becomes financially impossible. Deferred maintenance accelerates decay. The rental units that remain affordable are often barely habitable, trapping low-income families in substandard housing they can't afford to leave. Saginaw's population continues its long decline. The city has lost more than half its residents since its mid-century peak. Those who remain tend to be older, poorer, and less mobile. Young people leave for opportunities elsewhere, taking their earning power and future housing demand with them. The median age creeps upward. The tax base shrinks. City services deteriorate. It's managed decline without the management. The crisis extends beyond individual homes to the fabric of community itself. When a neighborhood loses 30 or 40% of its population, schools close. When schools close, families with children leave. When families leave, businesses shutter. The physical infrastructure, roads, water lines, streetlights, was built for a city of 98,000. Saginaw now has fewer than 50,000 residents trying to maintain systems designed for twice that population. The math doesn't work. Housing in Saginaw isn't crashing. Crashes imply something sudden. This is slower, more insidious. It's the steady erosion of value and community until what remains barely deserves to be called a housing market at all. But Saginaw's quiet collapse is just the beginning. What happens when a city's largest employer vanishes overnight, taking 60% of the population with it? Gary, Indiana, Gary. Indiana stands as perhaps the most visceral example of complete urban housing collapse in America. Driving through Gary feels post-apocalyptic. Block after block of abandoned homes, empty lots where structures once stood, shells of buildings with broken windows staring at vacant streets. This isn't hyperbole. 20% of single-family homes, roughly 5,700 properties, sit completely unoccupied. When you expand to include all blighted structures, the number exceeds 12,000, representing 37% of the city's buildings. The origins of Gary's catastrophe trace directly to U.S. Steel. The company literally built the city in 1906 to house workers for its massive Gary Works plant. For decades, steel defined everything: the economy, the population, the housing market. At its peak in the 1960s, Gary boasted over 180,000 residents and a thriving middle-class community. Then came the 1970s steel crisis, and the foundation crumbled. U.S. Steel slashed its Gary workforce from over 30,000 to fewer than 5,000. When the jobs vanished, so did the residents. Gary's population plummeted 60% over 50 years. The housing stock remained, but the people and jobs to support it did not. The result? Urban prairies, blocks of empty land dotted with the occasional remaining structure, nature reclaiming what was once a dense residential neighborhood. Property values in Gary exist more in theory than practice. The median home price hovers around $92,000 for the city proper, but that figure masks the reality that thousands of properties effectively have zero market value. Homes in abandoned sections of Gary literally cannot be sold at any price. The city has tried $1 home programs, giving away properties for $1 if buyers commit to rehabilitation. But even that struggles because the cost to bring a dilapidated Gary home to livable condition often exceeds $100,000. The poverty rate tells the human cost. 36.3% of residents live below the poverty line. Per capita income stands at just $14,383, making Gary one of the poorest cities in America. People don't choose to stay in Gary. They're trapped by lack of resources to leave. Their homes, rather than being assets, are anchors weighing them down. Blight breeds blight. Abandoned homes attract crime, drug activity, and illegal dumping. Property values on occupied homes near vacant structures plummet. Homeowners watch their equity evaporate, not because of anything they did, but because their neighbors' foreclosed homes sit rotting next door. The city struggles to demolish structures fast enough. It costs roughly $10,000 to properly demolish a home, and with thousands requiring removal, the backlog grows. Infrastructure crumbles from lack of tax revenue. Gary was built for a population 3 times its current size. Roads, water systems, electrical grids, all designed and maintained for 180,000 people, now serve 76,000. The cost per resident skyrockets while the tax base implodes. Basic services like police and fire protection become stretched dangerously thin. The Gary Housing Authority recently demolished a $1.5 million affordable housing complex that was recently built but never occupied, a surreal symbol of dysfunction. Money was spent, buildings constructed, and then immediately torn down because there was no viable plan to operate them. In Gary, even new construction ends in abandonment. What makes Gary's collapse particularly instructive is its speed and totality. This wasn't gradual decline over a century, it happened in 2 generations. A thriving city became a shell in 50 years. And it happened because the entire economy rested on one industry, one company, one product. When that foundation cracked, everything built on it collapsed. Indianapolis. Indianapolis might seem an odd inclusion. The city's economy is diversified. Population has remained relatively stable. The housing market shows turnover rates among the nation's highest, with homes selling quickly at affordable prices. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lurks a zombie foreclosure crisis and affordability trap that's hollowing out working-class neighborhoods. The zombie foreclosure rate in Indianapolis sits at 8.5%, among the highest rates for any major metro area in the country. These aren't properties moving through foreclosure efficiently. They're abandoned homes stuck in legal limbo, spreading blight through neighborhoods while the formal foreclosure process drags on for months or years. Cleveland and St. Louis have higher zombie rates, but Indianapolis's problem is growing while theirs stabilize. The mechanics of this crisis are brutal. A homeowner falls behind on payments and, seeing no way out, simply walks away. The bank initiates foreclosure but doesn't immediately take possession. The process can take 18 months in Indiana. During that time, the home sits vacant. Pipes freeze and burst. Copper wiring gets stripped. Windows break. The property deteriorates from neglect and vandalism. By the time the bank finally takes ownership, the home often requires complete rehabilitation or demolition. Adjacent property values collapse. If your neighbor's home becomes a zombie foreclosure, your property value drops by an average of 7 to 10%, according to research on similar markets. Through no fault of your own, your biggest asset loses value because of someone else's crisis. Multiply this across dozens of homes in a neighborhood, and entire sections of Indianapolis become economically distressed. The affordability crisis compounds the foreclosure problem. Despite housing wage requirements of $22.07 per hour for a two-bedroom rental, Indiana's minimum wage remains $7.25. A minimum wage worker would need 3 full-time jobs to afford median rent. Even at the state's average renter wage of $17.92, workers need 1.2 full-time jobs to afford housing. This creates a precarious situation where families stretch beyond their means to secure housing, leaving no buffer for unexpected expenses. A medical bill, a car repair, a temporary job loss. Any financial shock can trigger the cascade into foreclosure. And Indiana's foreclosure process, while not the nation's slowest, still takes long enough that homes deteriorate significantly before banks take action. Indianapolis also faces a vacancy crisis among investor-owned properties. Indiana leads the nation in vacant investor-owned homes, with nearly 7% sitting empty. These aren't homeowners facing hardship. They're investors who purchased properties, extracted what value they could, and now let them rot rather than investing in maintenance or disposition. It's economic abandonment dressed up as real estate investment. The city's neighborhoods show stark disparities. Some areas, particularly in the northern suburbs, remain stable and attractive. But in near East Side, Hawville, and Mapleton Fall Creek, vacancy rates climb above 15%. These neighborhoods face not just housing problems, but community collapse. Schools close, businesses shutter, crime rises, and remaining residents feel trapped. Indianapolis's crisis is particularly insidious because the city still functions relatively well on the surface. Downtown has seen investment. The tech and pharmaceutical sectors provide high-wage jobs. But that prosperity hasn't reached working-class neighborhoods, where the zombie foreclosure epidemic quietly destroys wealth and community. When foreclosure becomes the norm rather than the exception, home ownership stops being a path to stability and becomes a risk too great for families to take. The turnover rate that makes Indianapolis look hot? It's people cycling through home ownership, trying and failing to make it work, then leaving for someone else to try. That's not a healthy market. It's a failing one disguised by velocity. Kansas City, Missouri-Kansas City, sold itself for decades as the affordable alternative, a place where middle-class families could buy homes without the crushing costs of coastal cities. That reputation is shattering in real time. The price-to-income ratio has exploded from 3-to-1 in 2016 to 4 or 5-to-1 today. Home prices jumped 54% since COVID, while wages barely budged. The affordability that defined Kansas City is vanishing, replaced by a crisis where working families can no longer afford to live in the communities they built. The median home price now sits at $380,000, a figure that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. Meanwhile, median household income hasn't kept pace. The Metropolitan Area Research Council reports that Kansas City's economic recovery from the pandemic has been slower than peer metros, and wage growth continues to lag behind inflation. Workers are producing more than ever, but the basics, food, housing, childcare, healthcare, are rising faster than their paychecks. The housing wage tells the story starkly. According to recent calculations, a worker needs to earn significantly more than Kansas City's typical wages just to afford median rent, let alone purchase a home. 45.8% of Kansas City renters are cost-burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of income on housing. When nearly half of renters are already stretched thin, home ownership becomes a distant dream rather than an attainable goal. Supply constraints make the problem worse. Kansas City has failed to build enough housing to keep pace with demand, but the demand itself is softening. Building permits have declined since 2020, while vacancy rates decrease, a paradox that suggests the city is caught between insufficient construction and waning buyer capacity. Developers won't build without confidence in demand, but families can't afford to buy what does get built. The lock-in effect compounds the shortage. Homeowners who secured mortgages at 3% or lower during the pandemic now face 7% rates if they move. They're essentially trapped by the math. Even if they want to relocate for work or family reasons, doing so would double their monthly housing cost. This reduces turnover and keeps inventory artificially tight. But it also means the people who bought homes 4 years ago are the last generation who could afford to do so. Kansas City's labor market provides little hope. Frank Lenk, director of the Mid-America Regional Council's Office of Economic Research, noted that the area's economy doesn't bust as low as other metros, but it also doesn't boom as high. With each economic cycle, Kansas City falls further behind. Jeremy Hill from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City put it bluntly, "We don't really have a labor problem, we have a wage problem." Lower wages make it harder to attract talent, which constrains economic growth, which suppresses wages further. It's a cycle that makes housing increasingly unaffordable, even as home prices moderate. Investor activity distorts the market. Large quantities of investor-owned properties increase competition and drive up prices beyond what local incomes support. When investors compete with first-time buyers, families lose. They can't outbid cash offers from entities that view homes as yield generators rather than places to live. This pushes more families into renting, which increases rental demand, which raises rents, which makes it even harder to save for a down payment. The grocery bill provides a visceral sense of the crisis. Food costs are up 32% since 2019, while wages increased only 29%. A pound of ground beef costs nearly as much as the federal minimum wage. Families making impossible choices, food or rent, childcare or healthcare, can't simultaneously save for homes. Kansas City's turnover rate, which makes it appear as a hot market, actually reflects instability. People move frequently, not because the city is attractive, but because they're chasing affordability that keeps retreating. When affordability dies in a city that built its identity on being affordable, you don't just lose a housing market, you lose the entire value proposition that made the place work. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago faces a perfect storm: elevated foreclosure rates, relentless population exodus, a crushing fiscal crisis, and property taxes that function as a slow-motion wealth transfer from homeowners to pension funds. The city that once defined Midwestern urban success now exemplifies what happens when decades of fiscal mismanagement collide with changing economic realities. The foreclosure rate tells part of the story. Chicago ranks among major metros with the highest foreclosure filings. 1 in every 2,203 housing units faced foreclosure in 2025. That's better than Cleveland or Detroit, but alarming for a city Chicago's size and supposed economic strength. These aren't isolated incidents. They represent systemic stress across neighborhoods where homeowners can no longer sustain the cost of ownership. Property taxes are the killer. Illinois' pension crisis, with unfunded liabilities exceeding $130 billion, gets financed largely through property taxes. Chicago homeowners saw effective property tax rates climb into the stratosphere as the city and state scrambled to cover obligations. A home assessed at $300,000 might carry a property tax bill approaching $9,000 annually, 3% of the home's value just in taxes. That's before mortgage, insurance, maintenance, or any other costs. The math becomes impossible. If your home appreciates 2% per year, but your taxes rise 4% annually, you're losing ground. Many Chicago homeowners discovered they owe more in cumulative property taxes over a decade than their homes gained in value. At that point, homeownership isn't building wealth, it's destroying it. The only winners are the pension funds collecting payments for obligations incurred decades ago. Population loss accelerates the crisis. Chicago lost roughly 340,000 residents between 2010 and 2024. When people leave, the tax base shrinks, forcing higher rates on remaining residents, which drives more people away. It's a death spiral that's hard to escape. The people leaving tend to be younger, more educated, and higher earning, precisely the demographic that cities need to thrive. They're replaced by older, less mobile residents and new arrivals with lower incomes, shifting the city's economic profile downward. Commercial real estate collapse compounds residential stress. Chicago's office vacancy rate exceeds 20% as remote work becomes permanent. Empty office towers mean reduced commercial property tax revenue, shifting more burden onto residential owners. Business closures in the Loop and near North Side eliminate jobs and reduce the city's economic vitality, making Chicago less attractive to the young professionals it needs to stabilize population. Crime perceptions, whether fully accurate or not, drive migration decisions. High-profile incidents and political controversy over policing have convinced many suburbanites and potential residents that Chicago is unsafe, regardless of statistical reality. Perception shapes the housing market as much as fact. If people believe Chicago is declining, they won't buy homes there, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The city's fiscal situation offers no easy solutions. Chicago can't raise taxes much higher without triggering even more exodus. It can't cut services without making the city less livable. It can't meaningfully reform pensions without constitutional amendments that seem politically impossible. The trapped feeling that individual homeowners experience mirrors the trap the entire city faces. Neighborhoods show extreme disparities. Lincoln Park, Lakeview, and parts of the South Side remain stable or even thrive. But West Side and South Side neighborhoods face concentrated foreclosure, vacancy, and blight that rivals Detroit at its worst. When a city contains both neighborhoods with million-dollar homes and entire blocks with near-zero property values, the market isn't functioning, it's fragmenting. Chicago's housing market isn't crashing uniformly. It's experiencing targeted collapse in working-class neighborhoods while wealthy areas insulate themselves. That disparity creates a two-tier city where homeownership remains viable only for upper-income residents who can absorb property tax increases and ride out volatility. For working families, the Chicago homeownership dream is dead, killed by taxes, crushed by fiscal crisis, and buried under population loss that shows no sign of reversing. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland holds the distinction of having the nation's highest zombie foreclosure rate among major metros, 9.1%. Let that sink in. Nearly 1 in 10 foreclosed properties in Cleveland sits abandoned in legal limbo, deteriorating and spreading blight through neighborhoods while the formal foreclosure process grinds forward at a glacial pace. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's community-scale abandonment dressed up in legal process. The mechanics of Cleveland's zombie crisis reveal systemic dysfunction. Ohio's foreclosure process is neither the fastest nor slowest nationally, but the combination of low property values and high abandonment rates creates a toxic feedback loop. A home worth $40,000 faces foreclosure. The owner, realizing they're underwater even without the mortgage, walks away. The bank, calculating that foreclosure and disposition costs will exceed any recovery, moves slowly or not at all. The home sits vacant for months or years. During that vacancy, Cleveland's harsh winters destroy unheated homes. Pipes freeze and burst, flooding interiors. Roofs develop leaks that accelerate structural damage. Scrappers strip copper wiring, pipes, and fixtures, leaving shells. Vandals break windows and doors. By the time the bank finally takes ownership, if it ever does, the property may require $50,000 or $60,000 in rehabilitation, making it worthless in a market where homes sell for $40,000. Adjacent homeowners watch their equity evaporate. Research consistently shows that each zombie foreclosure within 500 feet reduces surrounding property values by 7 to 10%. In neighborhoods with multiple zombies on a single block, cumulative value loss can reach 30 or 40%. Families who maintained their homes, paid their taxes, and did everything right see their biggest asset destroyed by neighbors' abandonment. Cleveland's population loss underpins the foreclosure crisis. The city has shed over 40% of residents since its 1950 peak, dropping from over 900,000 to around 370,000 today. That's not gradual decline, it's evacuation. The housing stock remained while the population left, creating surplus inventory that drove values down and made abandonment economically rational for underwater homeowners. The manufacturing collapse that triggered Cleveland's decline continues to echo. While the city has made efforts to diversify into healthcare, higher education, and professional services, the good-paying blue-collar jobs that sustained working-class home ownership are gone. The jobs that replaced them pay less and offer fewer benefits, creating an employment base that can't support stable home ownership at the scales the city needs. Property values in Cleveland tell a story of chronic stagnation. While some neighborhoods like Ohio City and Tremont have seen revitalization and rising values, vast sections of the city remain trapped in low-value purgatory. Homes sell for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Amounts that make financial sense neither for buyers nor sellers. At these price points, transaction costs, repairs, and carrying costs can exceed the property's entire value. The rental market offers little relief. Vacancy rates for rentals in Cleveland have tightened slightly, but rental income relative to property costs remains unattractive for investors seeking return. Many rental properties operate at marginal profitability or outright losses, sustained only by owners who've already written off the investment mentally and are just trying to extract whatever cash flow they can before abandoning the property entirely. Cleveland's problem isn't just that homes foreclose, it's that the foreclosure process itself creates long-term blight that's nearly impossible to reverse. A neighborhood with 2 or 3 zombie foreclosures might recover if addressed quickly. But Cleveland has hundreds concentrated in East Side and parts of West Side, creating zones where revitalization seems impossible because the blight is too extensive and property values too depressed to justify investment. The city has tried various interventions, land banks, $1 home programs, demolition grants. But the scale of Cleveland's abandonment crisis exceeds the capacity of these programs. You can't demolish or rehabilitate your way out of a problem this big, this fast. For every 10 properties addressed, 15 more slide into abandonment. It's like bailing water from a sinking ship with a teaspoon. Cleveland's housing crisis represents the endpoint of decades of bad decisions, economic change, and demographic collapse. The 9.1% zombie foreclosure rate isn't an aberration. It's the logical result of a city with too many homes, too few people, too little wealth, and no clear path forward. When nearly 1 in 10 foreclosures becomes a zombie, you don't have a housing market, you have a housing graveyard. Youngstown, Ohio Youngstown represents industrial collapse in its purest, most distilled form. Once called Steel Valley for its concentration of steel mills and manufacturing, Youngstown today stands as a monument to what happens when an entire region's economic foundation disappears overnight. The city has been used as a case study in urban planning schools under the banner of smart shrinkage, a euphemism for managed decline that acknowledges the city will never return to its former size or vitality. The statistics are devastating. 34.9% of Youngstown residents live below the poverty line, making it one of the poorest cities in America. Median household income sits at just $24,448, barely half the national median. These aren't numbers that support a functional housing market. They're numbers that indicate survival mode. Housing values in Youngstown have essentially flatlined for decades. Homes sell for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, amounts that make mortgages almost nonsensical. Many properties change hands through cash transactions because the transaction costs of securing and servicing a mortgage on a $25,000 property often exceed the value of financing. At this price level, home ownership becomes something entirely different from the American dream narrative. It's simply the cheapest available shelter option. The city's shrinkage has been both dramatic and sustained. Youngstown lost roughly 60% of its population since its 1960 peak, dropping from over 160,000 to about 67,000 today. The physical infrastructure, roads, water systems, schools, police, and fire protection was built for a city 3 times the current size. Maintaining that infrastructure with 1/3 the tax base creates impossible mathematics. Youngstown embraced shrinking city strategies earlier than most American cities, explicitly acknowledging that revival to previous size wasn't coming. The city's Youngstown 2010 plan focused on controlled demolition, land banking, and concentrating remaining residents in viable neighborhoods while letting others revert to green space. It was pragmatic and ahead of its time. It also didn't work. Zombie foreclosures plague Youngstown, though exact rates are difficult to pin down due to the sheer scale of abandonment. Research on vacant lot greening in Youngstown showed that community-led maintenance of abandoned properties reduced violent crime and illegal dumping, demonstrating that active intervention could at least slow the decay, if not reverse it. But that requires resources the city doesn't have and a tax base that continues to shrink. The steel industry collapse that destroyed Youngstown wasn't gradual. The Black Monday closures in 1977 saw multiple mills shut down nearly simultaneously, eliminating tens of thousands of jobs in a matter of months. The city never recovered because it couldn't diversify fast enough. The physical and human capital built around steelmaking didn't translate to other industries. Workers skilled at running blast furnaces couldn't seamlessly transition to service sector jobs that paid half as much. What remains today is a hollowed-out core surrounded by neighborhoods at various stages of abandonment. Some blocks have only 1 or 2 occupied homes remaining. Others have been demolished entirely, returning to prairie, the urban prairie phenomenon that's become symbolic of Rust Belt decline. Nature reclaims land that was urban for a century. The housing market in Youngstown, to the extent one exists, functions more like frontier homesteading than modern real estate. Properties get purchased for essentially land value, rehabilitated through sweat equity, and occupied by families who have nowhere else to go. There's no expectation of appreciation, no dream of building wealth through home ownership. It's purely functional: 4 walls, a roof, and title to a plot of land. Youngstown's younger residents leave at the first opportunity. The city's population skews older because those with mobility, education, skills, youth, depart for opportunities elsewhere. This creates a demographic death spiral where the remaining population is increasingly elderly and poor, further reducing the tax base and accelerating decline. The city's housing crisis isn't acute, it's chronic. There's no single moment of collapse, no dramatic housing crash. Instead, it's the slow, relentless erosion of value and vitality until what's left barely resembles a functional housing market at all. Youngstown has been crashing for 50 years. The question isn't whether it will hit bottom, it's whether there is a bottom. For families trapped in Youngstown, home ownership provides neither stability nor wealth. Their homes are worth less than vehicles, appreciate more slowly than inflation, and sit in neighborhoods where services decline year after year. They own property that imprisons rather than liberates in a city that's been dying longer than most of its residents have been alive. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit's name has become synonymous with urban collapse, but the reality in 2025 is more complex and troubling than the simple narrative of ruin. Yes, the city lost over 40% of its population since 1970. Yes, vast neighborhoods sit abandoned. Yes, property values remain shockingly low. But Detroit's crisis in 2025 has evolved into something more insidious: chronic affordability failure despite rock-bottom prices. The median home price in Detroit proper stands at $92,303. That's not a typo. Homes in a major American city sell for less than many used cars. The metro area median sits at $202,739, but that figure includes suburbs. Within city limits, you can buy entire houses for the cost of a down payment in coastal cities. This looks like affordability? It's not. Detroit has one of the nation's highest poverty rates and lowest median household incomes. 24.4% of Detroit residents live below the poverty line. The median household income barely exceeds $40,000. When a quarter of residents are in poverty and typical income is $40,000, even a $92,000 home becomes unaffordable once you factor in property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the reality that many Detroit properties require substantial rehabilitation. The cruel paradox: Detroit's homes are cheap because they're in Detroit. A $30,000 house sounds like a deal until you realize it needs a new roof, new plumbing, new electrical, and sits in a neighborhood where half the surrounding homes are abandoned. By the time you make it livable, you've invested $70,000 or $80,000 into a property worth maybe $50,000, if you can find a buyer at all. Property taxes compound the problem. Detroit's effective property tax rates are among the nation's highest relative to income. While nominally middle of the road as percentages, when applied to incomes far below national medians, they become crushing. A family earning $40,000 paying $4,000 in annual property tax, insurance, and utilities before even touching mortgage or maintenance doesn't have a housing success story. They have a poverty trap. Insurance costs have exploded. Detroit's auto insurance rates are the nation's highest due to fraud and accident rates. That extends to property insurance, where companies factor in everything from crime to property value instability. Many Detroit homeowners can't afford proper insurance and go without, making them vulnerable to total loss from fire or storm damage. The home appreciation narrative that justifies home ownership doesn't work in Detroit. Prices have risen 6.2% year over year in the metro, but within city limits, appreciation is far more uneven. Many neighborhoods saw zero appreciation or declines. When your home appreciates 3% annually, but inflation runs at 4%, you're losing wealth in real terms. Add in the costs of ownership, and most Detroit homeowners would have been better off renting and investing their down payment in literally anything else. Detroit's recovery, widely celebrated in downtown and midtown areas, hasn't reached most neighborhoods. The investment flowing into greater downtown creates a gleaming facade, while vast sections of the east side and parts of the west side continue hollowing out. This two-tier city means statistics about Detroit's revival are meaningless for residents in neighborhoods that remain abandoned and declining. The vacancy problem persists. While demolition efforts have removed thousands of blighted structures, the pace of decline still outstrips intervention. Urban prairie continues expanding, blocks of empty land where homes once stood, now returning to grass and scrub. These aren't parks or planned green spaces. They're neighborhoods that ceased to exist. Detroit's housing crisis differs from Cleveland's or Gary's in a critical way. The city is large and diverse enough that pockets of success can coexist with vast areas of failure. But for the majority of Detroiters, working-class families struggling to maintain homes in neighborhoods that continue declining, the crisis is immediate and worsening. Their homes don't build wealth. Their neighborhoods don't improve. Their equity doesn't grow. Detroit stands as proof that low prices alone don't create affordability or opportunity. When homes cost $90,000, but residents earn $40,000 and face highest-in-nation insurance costs, highest-in-class property taxes, and chronic neighborhood instability, those $90,000 homes might as well cost $900,000. They're equally out of reach. The city's housing crisis isn't the dramatic collapse of 2008 through 2012. It's the chronic failure of 2025. A market where homeownership costs more than it returns, where neighborhoods remain in decline despite years of recovery, and where the fundamental promise of housing as wealth building has been completely severed. That's not a crash. It's something worse. It's a permanent state of failure disguised as affordability. St. Louis, Missouri St. Louis holds the grim distinction of having America's most severe recent population decline. The city lost more than 20,000 residents in just 4 years between 2020 and 2024, the steepest drop of any American city during that period. Since its 1950 peak near 900,000, St. Louis has shed 65% of its population, now standing at barely 280,000. This isn't gradual demographic transition, it's evacuation. The zombie foreclosure rate of 8.9% ranks second highest nationally among major metros, behind only Cleveland. Roughly 1 in 11 foreclosed properties sits abandoned mid-process, spreading blight through neighborhoods already struggling with population loss and disinvestment. The math is brutal. As people leave, homes foreclose. As homes foreclose, surrounding property values drop. As values drop, more people leave. It's a death spiral playing out in real time across the city's north side and parts of South City. What makes St. Louis's decline particularly alarming is its acceleration. While the city has been shrinking for decades, the recent pace suggests something has broken. Losing 20,000 residents in 4 years, when your total population is under 300,000, represents 7% of the city disappearing. At that rate, St. Louis could drop below 200,000 within a decade. The city's housing stock tells a story of mismatch. Infrastructure and homes built for 900,000 people, now serving 280,000. The cost per resident to maintain streets, water systems, sewers, and public safety skyrockets as the denominator shrinks. Property taxes rise to cover shortfalls, making the city less affordable, driving more exodus. It's impossible math. Manufacturing decline started St. Louis's troubles, but the 21st century crisis is more complex. The city suffers from severe racial and economic segregation that rivals any American metro. North St. Louis, predominantly black, faces concentrated poverty, disinvestment, and abandonment rates that exceed even Detroit in comparable neighborhoods. South and Central West End areas, whiter and wealthier, remain relatively stable, but can't offset the collapse happening elsewhere. Property values in declining St. Louis neighborhoods have become essentially fictional. Homes officially assessed at $50,000 can't find buyers at $20,000. The transaction costs, carrying costs, and rehabilitation costs exceed any reasonable expectation of future value. At that point, home ownership becomes irrational. You're paying to lose money. The International Shoe Company, once the world's largest footwear producer with dozens of St. Louis factories, epitomizes the industrial collapse. When those factories closed, tens of thousands of jobs disappeared. The manufacturing jobs that replaced them paid less and were less secure. St. Louis never developed a replacement economic engine strong enough to support its physical footprint. Crime perceptions, whether statistically justified or not, accelerate the exodus. St. Louis consistently ranks among the nation's most dangerous cities in per capita crime statistics, though those numbers are complicated by the city-county divide that makes direct comparisons difficult. Regardless of statistical nuance, perception drives decisions. People believe St. Louis is dangerous, so they don't move there, don't invest there, don't see a future there. The city-county split is unique and destructive. St. Louis County surrounds, but doesn't include St. Louis City, creating a political and economic fragmentation where the urban core can't capture suburban growth or share tax bases with surrounding areas. This means city residents bear the full cost of infrastructure and services, while suburban residents benefit from proximity without contributing. It's a structure that guarantees urban decline. School quality accelerates the death spiral. St. Louis Public Schools struggles with low performance, high costs, and declining enrollment. Families with children, precisely the demographic needed to stabilize neighborhoods, leave for county schools. This hollows out neighborhoods of the cohort most likely to invest in homes and community, leaving behind an older, poorer, less mobile population. St. Louis's housing crisis combines the worst of multiple failures: population collapse, zombie foreclosures, fiscal stress, and demographic hollowing. The city isn't just losing people, it's losing the specific people it needs to survive. Young families, educated professionals, and upwardly mobile workers all exit at first opportunity, taking their future earnings and housing demand with them. Properties in declining St. Louis neighborhoods represent not just bad investments, but anti-investments, assets that consume wealth rather than building it. Homeowners discover they've trapped themselves. They can't sell without taking massive losses. They can't leave without abandoning equity. They can't stay without watching their neighborhood deteriorate further. It's paralysis at every scale: individual, neighborhood, citywide. The 20,000 people who left in 4 years aren't coming back. Their homes sit vacant or get demolished. Their neighborhoods slide further into abandonment. Their departure accelerates the decline for those who remain. St. Louis's housing market isn't crashing, it's experiencing terminal decline, and the patient is running out of time. Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan embodies complete systemic housing collapse. The city's name became synonymous with governmental failure after the water crisis poisoned residents with lead-contaminated water between 2014 and 2020. But Flint's housing catastrophe predates and transcends the water crisis, representing decades of accumulated abandonment, poverty, and civic breakdown that continues accelerating today. 40% of Flint residents live below the poverty line, the highest poverty rate of any American city. Not just in the Midwest, not just in the Rust Belt, the entire United States. 2 in 5 Flint residents are in poverty. That's not a housing market demographic, that's humanitarian crisis demography. The water crisis destroyed whatever remained of Flint's housing market stability. Imagine trying to sell a home in a city where the water supply poisoned children, where government officials knew and covered it up, where the infrastructure failure was so total that residents still don't fully trust the water today. Property values didn't just decline, they evaporated. Who wants to own property in a city that poisoned its own residents? But Flint's collapse started long before tainted water. General Motors, which literally put Flint on the map and employed tens of thousands, began withdrawing in the 1980s. Factory after factory closed, jobs vanished, population hemorrhaged. The city lost over half its peak population, dropping from nearly 200,000 to approximately 102,000 today. That's a 50% decline, extraordinary even for the Rust Belt. The housing stock that remains reflects this collapse. Properties sell for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, amounts less than used cars. At these price points, conventional mortgages don't exist. Banks won't lend for properties worth so little. Transactions happen in cash if they happen at all. Many homes can't be sold at any price because rehabilitation costs exceed any conceivable future value. Vacant and abandoned properties dominate entire neighborhoods. Genesee County established a land bank specifically to manage the crisis, acquiring thousands of abandoned properties and trying to strategically demolish or rehabilitate them. But the scale exceeds the capacity. For every property addressed, others slide into abandonment. It's triage, not recovery. The feedback loops are vicious and accelerating. Poverty prevents maintenance, which accelerates decay, which reduces values, which increases abandonment, which spreads blight, which drives remaining residents away, which increases poverty concentration. Every element reinforces every other element in a downward spiral. Flint's water crisis eliminated any possibility of outside investment or population growth. The stigma of lead poisoning isn't just perception, it's documented health impact on an entire generation of children. Young families with options will never choose Flint. Businesses considering locations eliminated immediately. The reputational damage is permanent and total. Property taxes and insurance create impossible costs relative to values. A home assessed at $30,000 might carry $3,000 in annual property taxes and insurance. That's 10% of the property's value annually, just in those two costs, before mortgage, maintenance, or utilities. When carrying costs exceed 10% of value, ownership becomes economically irrational. You're paying to lose money. The rental market offers no escape. Vacancy rates for rental properties remain high because demand is suppressed by poverty. Landlords can't charge enough rent to cover costs, leading to deferred maintenance, property deterioration, and eventual abandonment. The rental housing stock slowly converts to vacant and blighted, feeding the same death spiral as owner-occupied homes. Illegal dumping, captured in research studies on Flint's blight crisis, reveals civic breakdown at the most basic level. Abandoned properties become dumping grounds. Without monitoring, lighting, or active use, lots fill with trash, construction debris, tires, appliances, and hazardous waste. Cleaning up dumping sites costs money the city doesn't have, so they remain, attracting more dumping and degrading entire blocks. Crime follows abandonment. Empty structures attract drug activity, theft, and violence. Police resources stretched thin across a city built for twice its current population can't effectively patrol or protect hollowed-out neighborhoods. Remaining residents live in fear, accelerating the exodus of anyone with means to leave. Flint's schools reflect and reinforce the crisis. The district faces chronic underfunding, low performance, and declining enrollment. Families with children, the core demographic for housing stability, leave or never arrive. This leaves a population skewed toward elderly residents aging in place and young adults trapped by poverty, neither group capable of reversing neighborhood decline. The city's fiscal situation offers no hope of intervention at scale. Flint's budget, decimated by population loss and property value collapse, can't fund the services a functioning city requires. Roads deteriorate, streetlights go dark. Police and fire response times lengthen. These service failures make the city less livable, driving more exodus, further shrinking the tax base. It's a classic fiscal death spiral with no clear exit. What makes Flint's position as number one justified isn't just the depth of its crisis. Gary and Youngstown face comparable abandonment, but the totality and permanence. The water crisis made Flint's collapse not just economic, but existential. The city violated the most basic social contract, providing safe water. That betrayal marks Flint as fundamentally broken in ways that no amount of investment or intervention can fully repair. Home ownership in Flint isn't an asset, it's a liability. Properties don't build wealth, they consume it. Neighborhoods don't provide community, they isolate remaining residents among vacant structures. The housing market doesn't function, it fails continuously at every scale. When 40% of residents live in poverty, when properties sell for less than monthly rent in functional markets, when entire blocks sit abandoned and decaying, you don't have a housing market crash. You have the complete dissolution of the housing market as a concept. Flint represents the endpoint. This is what happens when every system fails simultaneously over decades. When industry collapses, population evacuates, government poisons residents, poverty concentrates to catastrophic levels, and civic capacity evaporates. You get Flint. Not every Midwest city will follow this path, but Flint shows where the path leads if decline continues unchecked. For the residents who remain, those too poor to leave, too old to start over, too rooted to abandon their homes despite everything, Flint's housing crisis isn't abstract. It's lived reality where the American dream died completely, where home ownership became a trap rather than opportunity, where property represents burden rather than wealth. That's not a housing crash. That's housing as existential failure, and Flint is its capital. These 12 Midwest cities reveal that housing crashes aren't always dramatic price collapses. Sometimes they're slow-motion disintegrations, zombie foreclosures that spread block by block, poverty that makes cheap homes unaffordable, neighborhoods that empty slowly enough that you don't notice until they're gone. From Rockford's velocity-hiding desperation to Flint's total systemic failure, the pattern is clear. The Midwest housing crisis isn't about markets correcting, it's about markets ceasing to function entirely. The causes vary by city, but the mechanisms converge. Population loss concentrates poverty, fiscal stress drives tax increases, service cuts make cities less livable, younger residents flee, Remaining homeowners watch equity evaporate, and abandonment becomes the rational choice. Once that cycle begins, stopping it requires resources and political will that these cities simply don't have. What happens next depends on whether we're willing to acknowledge that some American cities are failing not temporarily, but structurally. No amount of revitalization can restore Gary or Youngstown to their peaks. The question becomes, can we manage decline humanely, or will we force hundreds of thousands of families to remain trapped in homes that imprison them in dying cities, pretending that markets will somehow self-correct their way back to prosperity that's never coming back? The housing crash in the Midwest isn't coming. It's already here. It's been here for decades. We've just been pretending it's not happening because the alternative, admitting that parts of America are permanently broken, is too painful to face. For the families living through it, trapped in homes worth less than the memories they contain, the pretending ended long ago. 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 Ended long ago.